How about if I just start at the beginning? you could be honest.
Because you know what? They have the sweat equity that went into that memory that they're making with their friends and family. And that's what's important with us. And that's what the I Am Real world's about.
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the best things about a spring food plot is you get a second chance if it fails.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins. Brought to you by buyafarm.com, your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. By tapping into Don's years of experience, dedication, and commitment, Chasing Giants focuses on the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails. Now, here is Don and co-host Terry Peer.
Well, tonight is August 22nd for episode 79 of Chasing Giants with Don Higgins. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, Terry?
I'm doing well. Time has just gone by so fast this summer. I'm going to be hunting a week from, actually 2 weeks from yesterday. So I got
Wow.
one more weekend to get my stuff together. I saw some friends of mine on social media. I believe South Carolina already opened, if I'm not mistaken, and saw some velvet bucks hitting the ground. It's going to be here for all of us before we know it.
It's coming up fast, and I'm going to guess most of us are probably ready.
Yeah. So what have you had going on this week? I know everyone's anxious to hear how the Iowa trip panned out. Do we want to start with that tonight?
Sure.
All right. So
Yeah.
you just traveled out to Iowa for the first time in, I believe, about a month, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I lost track of how many times I've been out there this spring and summer on scouting missions or whatever, and I think it's either my sixth or seventh trip, but I had stopped at a couple farms for permission while I was out there and was denied. I did receive permission on one farm, but the landowner said there was already one person hunting on, he's got probably 500 acres. He said there was somebody hunting there that I had to coordinate with them. And I talked to that hunter, and he actually has two sons that hunt too. And I felt kind of bad about, I'm just a stranger stepping into that situation where a man and his two sons are hunting. So I kind of just basically told him, if there's some place on the farm that you're not hunting, just let me know and I'll go there. Otherwise, I don't want to interfere in what you guys do in any way. He did there. His son did send me a aerial with a couple areas marked that they don't hunt, I guess. And then the son actually called me and had probably an hour-long conversation almost with the son. And sounds like a really good young man, probably about 20 years old. And I'm going to meet him for lunch next time I'm out in Iowa. But then there was another property that it's right next to one that I've already got permission on, that I stopped there and got permission to hunt one corner of that farm and put cameras up, which I did while I was out there. I moved some cameras on the public land when I was there, but basically spent 2 days out there beating the bushes for permission and running cameras.
All right, so the private land that you already have right now, you had cameras on it. Have you been able to look at those cards yet?
Yeah, I had, or I still have, cell cameras on that property,
Okay.
and but the batteries were dead on one of them, so I went in there and put new batteries in and changed the cards while I was at it. And, the best buck I've got a photo of is probably about 150-inch deer. But I'm not too concerned about it because, here in the next few weeks, bachelor groups are going to break up and bucks are going to move. And, in the summertime, you're either right there where the bachelor groups are at or you're not. And my farm is a perfect example. In the summertime, if you put cameras on my farm, you'd think it's not worth hunting. But I'll tell you what, when the bachelor groups break up and the crops start coming out and a little bit of hunting pressure around, it becomes pretty good in a hurry.
Right.
And that's what I'm hoping happens on some of these places where I got permission.
All right, so So we checked the cameras there. We shuffled some cameras around on public. What were the signs in public that you saw or got feedback on?
Well, to be honest, I'm pretty disappointed in what I've seen so far. I mean, not just not getting pictures of good bucks, but the amount of deer sign that I've seen, and that has been a little bit less than what I expected. Actually, quite a bit less. And when I was out there, I picked up replicas I had made of Smokey and Mel
Right.
at the Old Barn Taxidermy at Fort Madison, Iowa. And while I was there, met John Mulligan,
Right.
our buddy Johnny Utah,
Mm-hmm.
and he took some photos and such. But him and I had a conversation, and I mentioned to him, I said, really, Iowa's pretty disappointing for all the good things I've heard about it over the years. And he says, you know what? It's been the same way for me, and I'm living out here. He says, it's not what it's cracked up to be. And there's great pockets in the state, like he mentioned, but it's a far cry from a big buck behind every tree. And in fact, from what I've seen, I don't think it's much, at least the areas I've been to, it's not much different in Illinois at all. Now, I know overall there's some great bucks in Iowa, and Iowa's got some things going for it. It's got some of them pockets that Illinois used to have, but don't seem to have anymore. But I've been pretty disappointed with Iowa, to be honest. And I would encourage any listener, if you're going to apply for Iowa tags, which I encourage anyone to do, you need to know exactly where you're going to be hunting before you draw your tag. And a big mistake I made was last winter. I was too busy consulting all over the country when I should have been out there stomping around and finding, bucks, looking for shed antlers and finding exactly where I was going to go, and I wouldn't be doing it this time of the year. So I've kind of dug myself a little bit of a hole, and we'll just have to see how it turns out.
Right. And I don't think anybody's going to say Iowa is bad by any means, but I do think that there's this misconception of there's a booner behind every tree just because it's Iowa. And some people think, from out east or down in the south that you come to the Midwest and that it's golden, that there's big bucks everywhere. We are different than, mountain deer or deer down in the big Georgia pines or something like that. But I think there is a misconception that they're just hiding behind every fence post.
Yeah, and I'm just hoping that this fall, like I said, when the bachelor groups break up and they start rutting and crops start coming out and everything, that some of these places where I haven't seen anything all summer just explodes with buck activity. And, I may be judging a little bit too soon, but we'll just see how the fall goes.
So all in all, do you have your stands, target areas that you want to hunt? Do they look like they would be good places that a big buck could show up after the bachelor groups bust up?
Yeah, I do have, especially on a couple of properties. I think I've got about 4 stand sites that, I think I could shoot a big deer. But the big deer's got to be on the property first. If he's not there, you could set the best looking stand in the world. But if there's not a giant on the property, you're not going to shoot one.
Understand. But the tie-in for this is the guys that are running trail cameras right now. Maybe they're in a situation where they can only hunt their family farm, or they have one lease and it's all in on one property and that's it, and they're kind of disappointed right now with the deer that's there. Let's remind everybody what happens here when the velvet sheds and those bucks disperse. What are those bucks doing? What are they looking for is in the time frame associated with that? Because I think there's not a need to necessarily panic, and there's not a necessary, unless you're opening the first week of September like Kentucky, there's no real need to get overly excited, because that buck that's there on your camera or not there on your farm right now, that could change before an October 1st opening day.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening is there's a certain percentage of bucks, and I believe here in the farm country of the Midwest where I live, it's about 50% of those bucks have a totally separate fall winter range than spring summer. So I kind of compare it to retired people that go to Florida for the winter. You can, if they leave, a lot of them leave right after Christmas to go to Florida, and then they don't come back till spring. Well, if you was trying to catch them at home in January or February, good luck. It ain't gonna happen. They're at their other home down south, and it's kind of the same way with these bucks. You can be right in the buck's home range, but if the timing's not right, you may not see him at all. He may not be there.
So what is a buck actually looking for when they disperse? And I know there's going to be some bucks that are homebodies, some bucks will shift. Are they trying to set up basically their corridor or their position in the hierarchy of other male deer for the rut? Is that what they're looking for, or are they trying to find the most does? Are they at this point looking for places that don't have pressure? What's going on?
Well, in the summertime, they want that company of other bucks. They want to stay in a bachelor group, and so they'll leave their traditional or their fall winter range and go to those summer ranges where they can be with other bucks. But when those, in the fall, when the antlers harden up, the testosterone level in those bucks raises, and the urge to breed, kicks in. They want a place where they can be the top dog. Now, a lot of young bucks are never going to find that, but they want that, and they want safety. So they want a place they feel safe, but they also want a range where they feel that they are the top dog. And I think that's the reason. I know that a lot of the listeners have heard enough about cull bucks. They don't want to hear any more, but I think the reason that it's important to cull bucks is those 3-year-olds are getting big enough where they can find somewhere, even if it's just a fence row or a hedgerow out in the middle of nowhere, they can, in much of the Midwest, they can find a place where they are the top dog. And they will go find it. And that's why I think culling is important, because if you've got, say, 3-year-old bucks on your farm, they're not all 3 going to stay there.
Right.
Because the dominant one was probably going to stay there. And that doesn't mean he's the biggest antlered. He's probably the biggest bodied and the poorest antlered. But he's more likely to stay in a prime location. And then the smaller bodied, bigger antlered buck is more likely to go find a new home or a place where he feels he's the top dog. And a lot of times they get killed doing that.
Right. So hypothetically, if I create a doe factory, am I going to attract some of these bucks that are shifting? Well, I teed one up for you there, buddy. Come on.
You did. You know what? The traditional doe factory, if you will, my farm probably fits it to a T. Because in the summer, I got all kinds of food. I got food year-round, so it doesn't matter if it's summer or winter or when it is. I believe in year-round nutrition and very diverse nutrition, different plots, but also natural browse, mast, soft mast and hard mast. So, I probably have the quote-unquote doe factory going on right here. But I'll tell you what. When fall rolls around, those does pull in a lot of bucks too.
Well, there's probably about 75% of our listeners laughing right now listening to the radio, and there's probably 25% of them rolling their eyes saying, I'm never listening to these two yahoos again. That's okay for both.
Well,
I couldn't resist.
All we can do is relate what we see in the deer woods, and that's what I see.
Please send all complaints to the customer service department of Chasing Giants. We'll be sure to file it with all the other complaints that we've gotten to this point. All right, so Iowa, still nothing really targeted that has you too awful excited, but again, it's still Iowa. I think the DNR in Iowa does a fantastic job with how they manage their out-of-state hunters to, keep. I think Illinois could learn a lot from it. I think Kentucky could learn a ton from it. I think Ohio could learn a lot from it, but it's still Iowa, so there's still big, exciting things that maybe we can see transition here as the bachelor groups break up, and hopefully something comes popping out of the woodwork for you. We've gotten this constant question of whether you will blindly go to Iowa, not knowing if there's a giant there or not, or whether you'll just stay home and hunt one of your target bucks. In a normal year, you would have a giant lined up in Illinois, but this year you got mature bucks that are decent size, but nothing's world class size. So this year's a little bit different for you.
And that's exactly why I decided to go ahead and draw an Iowa tag with the preference points I had, is because I don't have a big buck to hunt here in Illinois. So it's not going to bother me to pack up every time we get a cold front and head to Iowa for a few days.
Yeah.
And
so you will go out there blindly, even though you haven't gotten one on camera, if you see the conditions are right for an area. And the other thing, too, is one of the private grounds that you have access to hunt, and I think you're the only hunter on there, there's some historical insight that they've given you that there was a whopper on there last year.
Yep, that's for sure. And I'm kind of counting on that a little bit. But, see, I don't have the past history in Iowa from previous years like I do at home.
Right.
All these places that I have permission in Illinois, I've had trail cameras on these properties for years, so I know what was there last year and what to expect this year. In Iowa, that's not the case. Just because there's not a buck there this time of the year in the summer, I have no idea what's typically there in the fall. So I absolutely would go out there and just, hunt blindly, if you will.
So do you have any idea right now how many properties you have trail cameras on?
I counted it up the other day, and people may find this hard to believe, but right now I've got cameras on 33 different properties in 3 states, and I've also got them on public land in all 3 of those states. So, I got to thinking about that, and if someone had cameras on 10 properties, that would be a lot of properties. Well, I've got them on 3 times that many. I got them on 33 properties. And people have no idea how much effort I go through to find the giant buck to hunt. And this year, to be honest, I don't have a giant buck to hunt yet.
Yeah, out of all these properties, and I don't know. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions of what you do. A lot of people talk about your home farm, and you have shot, two world-class deer on that property, but you've shot monsters on other properties that you really don't manage for the most part. So, part of the reason, especially when you're going, and we've talked about it before, being able to go and accumulate access on a lot of different small properties that most people might overlook. What you're really doing there is you're playing the odds, because you're not going to have a world-class buck at every location every year. That type of property really doesn't exist unless it's inside of a fence.
Well, not the kind of properties I hunt. I mean, I've got properties I've had permission for several years that all I've ever done there is run a camera. I've never actually hunted them, because I'm searching for giants, and if there's not one there, then I'm not hunting, but I'll keep that camera there. And when one shows up, I know where to go.
Like the Joey buck, for example.
Exactly. Perfect example.
Right. So that's just setting the stage for another place. So if you don't have a giant on your home farm, or what have you, you have another place to go. I don't think people really understand that. The amount of different properties that you're scouting at any different time. I do think that's what sets you apart from a lot of people. And one of the reasons you've been so consistent is the amount of work and time you put in to go out and find these other properties. And it's not like you're paying thousands and thousands of dollars every year to lease them either. Most of these properties, you just have permission.
Yeah, and like I said, I've got cameras on public land in 3 states right now. So I'm just looking wherever I can get permission, public land, little out of the way places that nobody else thinks to hunt, whatever.
Yep.
I'll take what I can get.
All right. So are you ready to make your buck forecast for the year, or is it still a little bit too early?
You know what? I was going to do that tonight, but I think I want to check a few more cameras before I commit. I've got a pretty good idea what I would say as far as my buck forecast. I've always done this on my blog on my website, but I think for one thing, Facebook has changed its algorithm, so when I share a blog anymore, it gets about 10 likes. Nobody sees it. And I think that the place to just do it is here on Chasing Giants. So I want to take another week and check a few more cameras this week. And next week we will talk about the buck forecast for this season.
All right. And we might need to consider that for the rut report too. I'm about fed up with social media. It was all I could do not to just delete every account that I own this week. So I'll end up getting on a tyrant if we stay on that subject too long. So.
Well, maybe we better move on then.
Yep. All right. So what else we got today?
Best and worst. Ready for the best and worst?
Let's hear the best and the worst of.
Well, it does go right back to social media, though, so I may get you fired up before I'm done here.
It's a very good possibility.
Okay. The best thing I've seen on social media this week, there was a video clip. It was taken from a newscast. The local news reporters came out and did this interview. So there was this neighborhood. It looked like a subdivision, pretty nice houses in it and such. But there was an immigrant family that was put in a new home. I don't know if it was through Habitat for Humanity or what, but this immigrant family was put in a new home in this neighborhood. And from the newscast I seen, it looked like it was a white neighborhood, but this immigrant family was black folks from Africa. And this young man in this immigrant family, the neighbors would just, all hours of the day and night, this kid would be bouncing a basketball up and down the sidewalks. And that's all the kid did was bounce this basketball and bounce this basketball. Well, the neighbors showed up at this family's house and they asked about the young man and his basketball, and the family thought at first that all the neighbors were complaining because of the young man bouncing this basketball at all hours of the night. But actually what happened is the neighbors all chipped in and bought this young man a basketball hoop. And they put it together and put it there in front of that house. And you got to see this young man shoot a basket on his own hoop for the first time. And the kid's dream is to play in the NBA. And he was a real tall kid. And I mean, he went up and dunked it whenever they put that new rim up for him. So I hope his dream comes true. And I just think it's awesome that these folks, all seen this kid and you could clearly see what his dream was without even talking to him, basically because he always had that basketball in his hand, and all the neighbors chipped in and bought him that hoop. So I thought that was the best thing I've seen on social media. And, it kind of reminded me of something. Charles Barkley is, I'm a basketball fan. I know you used to be a Kentucky Wildcat fan, Terry, but Charles Barkley is a guy that I really like because of his outspokenness and just saying it like it is. He's kind of like you and I in a way. He just says whatever's on his mind.
Yep.
And I seen Charles here, and it was probably 6 months ago. He said, I believe that most white people are good and not racist. He says, I believe that most black people are good and not racist. And he said, but these stinking politicians on both sides just keep everybody stirred up. And as long as we're stirred up fighting against each other, we let them get away with their crimes.
Yep.
And that's not word for word what he said, but that was the gist of what he said. And I thought, man, this guy is right. The people I know are not racist people at all, and the people I hang out with. And I think the media and the politicians just stir up this racism garbage all the time. And when I seen these neighbors buy this young man a basketball goal, it reminded me of Charles and his little speech. And I don't think most people are racist at all.
Well, I think that it's a great reminder of when you can step in and do something and it's not for notoriety and it's not for selfish ambition. I mean, those people got that basketball goal not knowing that their story would ever go public, I'm guessing.
Right.
They didn't do it for selfish ambition. And the Bible talks about that quite a bit. It's servant leadership at its true point, to where someone has an idea and people rally around it to do the right thing for somebody. I have no doubt that the blessings that family will have through the gift of that child, that young man, they'll be blessed for that. It's just a great reminder of all the people that donated to Lester's Feet. It's a great reminder to those who are, maybe taking a unprivileged youth or a handicapped person hunting this upcoming season. When people put the focus on someone else, that's really where the blessings in life come. So it's just an awesome reminder. Whoever this family was, I'm sure that they had no idea that the story would have gone public or viral, and I think I did remember seeing something about it. But great reminder of putting priority and wanting to help others. It's great story.
And I don't even remember where this happened at, really, or it might have been an old story from who knows how far back. But the thing that at the very end, this young man says, I'm going to make it to the NBA, and when I do, I'm going to remember all my neighbors that helped me here. And I just thought that was awesome, and I'm sure all those people are pulling for him to make it to the NBA, and the odds of that happening are probably pretty slim.
Right.
But just for that young man to have his priorities in order and say that, I thought was pretty awesome too.
All right. So that that didn't get me fired up. So I'm guessing the worst is what's going to get me fired up.
Well, possibly. So, the worst thing, I just keep seeing this COVID garbage, and I've got a couple of comments, or I had two different people email me since last week, and thought that we should use our platform to promote everyone getting vaccinated. And I want to share something that about COVID that I've got kind of a unique perspective and how I develop my opinion about this whole COVID deal and the vaccine. So COVID is basically a virus, or it's caused by a virus. Well, EHD in deer is also caused by a virus. So back when I had my captive deer, the captive deer industry is basically can be devastated by EHD when that virus comes through. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned my buddy Rick Dotson, who when I got out of the deer business, Rick got some of my does that I had in my herd several years ago. Well, there was one year when EHD outbreak was really bad. I think it was the outbreak of 2012. Rick had, I believe it was 45 deer that summer, and then the EHD virus hit, and he lost 43 out of 45 deer.
Ooh.
So in about 30 days, his herd went from 45 to 2 due to the EHD virus, and it's devastating to the captive deer industry. So the captive deer industry has been trying forever to come up with a vaccine for their deer for EHD to address that virus. And there's been several vaccines made over the years with very limited success. And it's very similar to this COVID vaccine. So you would run your deer through and you would give them a vaccine shot, and then you would have to do it again. I don't remember. It's like 30 or 60 days later, you got to run them back through and get a booster shot. So you'd have to give them 2 shots, just like the COVID vaccine now. Well, the thing of it is, it never worked because the virus continually mutated. And I don't remember how many strains there was of EHD, but it was like in the teens. And so they would say, okay, this virus is good for, strain 3 and strain 9. But if you get any of the others, your deer are still going to die. And I see the same thing with this COVID vaccine. You get your shot, you get your booster, and now they're telling you need another booster because the first shot you got is not doing any good for this new Delta variant or whatever. This COVID virus is not going anywhere. The vaccine is going to be a continual series of boosters. And the boosters are probably not going to work because it's only going to, cover 1 or 2 variants. And the COVID is here. The virus is here. It's real. And I don't have a problem whatsoever. If anybody wants to get the vaccine, go for it. My big issue comes when you try to tell me I've got to, or I'm not allowed to fly on a plane if I don't. Well, if your vaccine works, why in the world do you care about what I do? It's like these people, they just want to follow whatever the government tells them so blindly that they throw all common sense out the window. I just can't imagine that you're so brainwashed that you buy into it to the point where you're taking the vaccine, but that ain't good enough because now I got to take it for you to be safe. That don't even make sense. If your vaccine works, it should work. And these continual COVID protocols or regulations, where like in New York City, where you can't go into a restaurant or any public place unless you've been vaccinated, this garbage is just totally out of hand. And it just, taking away the freedoms of people to make a choice for themselves is what just, I guess, infuriates me. And did I get you fired up, Terry?
Oh, I'm just on standby. You're doing a fine job yourself.
So that's my worst of the week is seeing just more of these COVID mandates being forced on people.
Here's my problem. This podcast is about us giving an unbiased opinion about our thoughts. This podcast will never be to tell someone else what to do, whether that means what bucks you cull, whether that means whether to get a vaccination or not. We encourage you all to make the decision that's best for you, whether it's culling deer, shooting does, having a doe factory, or what YouTube page to listen to. We just give our perspective on it and hope that you're entertained and you learn a little bit of something. But I am just absolutely sick and tired of celebrities, of people in the public eye, and businesses, organizations, social groups telling people what to do with their body. It's flat out disgusting that people can't make decisions for themselves, and that means whether you get the vaccination or not. Everybody comes from a different perspective of health concerns, family. They might be caregivers. They might work in a more dangerous area. Everybody's in a different position. And for someone to ask us to use our platform to try to persuade people to either take it or not take it, shame on you. Absolutely shame on you. We might lose listeners over it, but that's not what we're about. We're about sharing our thoughts, our opinion. I think we do a good job at that, but doggone it, the only thing I'm going to stand up and say is that women shouldn't kill their unborn babies. There, you want me to go on a limb and say what people should do with their bodies? There, I'll say that, but I'm not going to vaccines.
Well, that was the worst. And I think people didn't tune in to hear us go on a COVID rant. So,
how about a Biofarm segment? You ready for that?
I'm ready.
Buyafarm.com is your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. Now, here is Don Higgins with this week's featured property.
Okay, this week's featured property is a brand new listing. It is for 40 acres in Jackson County, Illinois. The 40 acres is all wooded, and it sets up very unique. It's a square 40 acres of woods that juts out from a bigger woods and is surrounded by ag fields. So, kind of a unique situation. I think it would be a great starter property for someone. It'd be super easy to hunt. The terrain looks very flat, where you could go in there and around the edges put some small food plots for hunting different wind directions. Access looks super easy from about any direction, any wind. But it's got gated access. It's got both deer and turkey. The timber is supposedly mature, marketable timber. And the address it's on Crelo Road near Elkville, Illinois. Taxes are only $78.20. So if you're interested in buying your first hunting property, or maybe you already got property, but you're just looking for another place to diversify or whatever, this 40 acres in Jackson County might just fit the bill for you. So if you're interested, call Mark Kennedy. Mark's phone number is 618-924-1747.
I bet you could probably forget to pay that tax bill and nobody would really even ever notice. $78.
Well, the government would notice. They'd probably lock you up for $78. But
yeah, as long as maybe if you took your vaccination shot and and voted for liberal, then they wouldn't. But
probably good then.
Calm down, people. I'm just send all complaints to the Chasing Giants customer service department. They'll be happy to talk to you and file your claim.
All right, we ready for submitted questions?
Yeah.
All right, the first one tonight comes from Matt Gardner from Morton, Illinois. Matt says, "Good evening, Don. I hope you have been able to locate your next giant to chase. I really appreciate the service you and Terry are providing to the hunting community. The podcast is something I look forward to every week. I have an hour drive to my farm, and it fills that time perfect. My question is regarding the fall dispersal that you have talked about. I know this shift takes place every fall around the time they shed their velvet. I was first wondering why this takes place. Are the bucks looking for different food or cover, or just preparing for the rut? Did the majority of the bucks make this shift? I know your farm is a bit of a unique situation due to where it's located, and it seems as if the bucks you watch during the summer are the ones you have in the fall as well. Do you experience any of this same dispersal on your farm? The short history I have on my farm is that there is little buck activity during the summer, but I get a lot of activity starting late September through the end of the season. You have commented that in order to kill the giants, you have to hunt where they spend their daylight hours. How do you go about chasing these giants if the summer intel you get will be changing when the dispersal happens? Do the older mature bucks tend to not disperse as much and stick to their core area? Sorry for the long-winded question. Here's to a great 2021 and hopefully another giant on your wall. Take care and God bless."
Sorry, I didn't know you asked that question. I asked it earlier, so.
Yeah, we covered a lot of that earlier, Matt, but one thing that jumped out at me, and the reason I picked your question, is you have a misunderstanding about my farm, and I figure if you do, probably other listeners do too, and I want to clear that up. It says, I know your farm is a bit of a unique situation due to where it's located, and it seems as if the bucks you watch during the summer are the ones you have in the fall as well. Well, that is true to some degree, but the deal here, Matt, is that the bucks that, when I watch these bucks in the summer, I'm not getting their photos on my farm. I have learned over the years where the bucks that spend the fall of my farm, I've learned where they spend their summers. And I know of 3 very distinct bachelor groups that are in the same area every summer. One of them is west of my farm, one of them is east of my farm, and one of them is south of my farm, all within 2 miles. So many of the bucks that are spend the fall and winter on my place, they're not here during the summer at all, as I mentioned earlier. But they move out to these other bachelor groups, and I get their pictures on these, away from my farm on these bachelor groups, knowing that, when the fall dispersal happens, they will head to my place. They just seem to follow that pattern year after year. What was some of the other questions you had? Why this takes place? Again, Terry and I talked about it earlier. Those bucks are shifting to where they're going to, spend the fall chasing and breeding does. Do the majority of bucks make this shift? And my guess, based on my experience here in the Midwest and the farm country, where there's a lot of ag, is it appears to me that about 50% of the bucks or so make a definite shift in their range from where they spend the summer. Others stay pretty close to where they spent the summer. They may move, a half a mile or so, but they're real close to where they spend the summer. And about 50% of them probably move a mile or more. That's just a guess based on my years of experience tracking them with trail cameras. Let's see if there's any other questions here. Oh, how do you go about chasing these giants if the summer intel you get will be changing when the dispersal happens? So in my summer intel, basically, I'm just doing either one of 2 things. I'm either trying to find new bucks to hunt, or looking at new areas, or I'm going to, like the bachelor groups I just described, where I know that those bucks where they'll disperse to, and I'm tracking bucks that I know. I'll check. That gives me a chance to check out their new racks before fall, and any new bucks that might have joined that bachelor group. But a lot of times I'm just trying to find new bucks. So when I find a new buck in the summer that interests me, in the fall I will start branching out. If he shifts his location, I'll keep a camera there in the fall. But if he shifts to a different range in the fall, I'll start moving cameras and trying to get permission on surrounding properties to figure out, where he goes. And that's exactly what I did with the Trump buck that I shot in 17. In 2016, when that buck blew up and I decided I wanted to kill him, well, I had no idea where he was going once he shifted his range. So I started moving cameras, and I found where he went, and then I killed him the next year. But that's kind of how I use that summer intel, basically to find target bucks, and then I branch out from there to put together, where they spend their fall. Another question you had was, do the older mature bucks tend to not disperse as much and stick to their core area? I have not found that to be the case at all. A buck, he develops a pattern early in life. By the time he's 2 years old, they do a lot of shifting when they're yearlings. That dispersal will happen basically from late spring when they leave their mother and they're growing that first rack. Throughout the entire summer, they're dispersing, as well as that entire first fall and winter. But by the time they're 2 years old, a lot of those bucks are settling into a home range that they will have for the rest of their life, and a pattern that they will follow for the rest of their life. So, older mature bucks, they're just following what they did the year before and the year before that. So I don't see that.
The older a buck gets, the more settled in he usually gets. Is that the theory, that their range actually gets smaller the older they are if they're not pressured?
That's definitely true for a lot of bucks.
Okay. But what we talked about earlier is that 3-year-old is at a pivotal point where he's starting to get big enough he can push other deer around. He might go leaving looking for an area, especially if there's an older buck that's whooping him up. When the doe comes in heat, there's a good chance he could drift off, and that's why we're talking about those 3-year-olds, right?
Absolutely. And what I've noticed about the 3-year-olds is what they tend to do is, they settle into that pattern as 2-year-olds, but as 3-year-olds, they've grown up enough to where they're some of the bigger bucks in an area. Maybe not the top dog, but they're not at the bottom of the totem pole anymore either. And they seem to range a little bit farther. So instead of staying home and staying out of trouble, they wander out away from home. Now they come back a lot of times.
But that's why
but
a lot
if
of
they come back and they find a bully buck there, a lot of times they leave again and maybe leave permanently.
But that's why a lot of 3-year-olds get shot. They're covering more ground. So your theory that you've always talked about is if a buck makes it through the 3rd shotgun season, that's when you know we got something that we can start trying to pattern year after year.
Exactly.
As long as we keep intrusion down. I mean, it's all out the window if you're tromping through and push him off. He's going to go find a place that's secluded if there's constant pressure, though.
Right.
All right, that's a good question. Sorry I took half of it in the beginning. I guess I should read the questions before we start.
I was thinking about that as you was talking about that, but I figured we'd cover it again.
All right.
And I knew he had several questions in his submission, so
well, thanks for the
we
question,
had plenty
Matt.
to talk about. The next question comes from Daryl Nisley from Shreve, Ohio, and Daryl is right to the point. How do you tell if a buck has potential to become a giant? Basically, the more points a deer has when he's young, the more he's going to have when he's older. And, more points means a higher score in a lot of cases. Sometimes the rack may not have, 15 points, but, maybe it's just an 8 or a 10, but he's got bumps where you can see that he could split in the future, or maybe extra points that could be there in the future. So if you follow me on social media, I've been talking about smooth rack 8-pointers and how I like to remove those from my property. And the reason for it is I just, too many times, most of those bucks are going to remain smooth rack 8-pointers, no matter how old they live to be. So I just as soon remove them when they're 3 years old instead of and make room for a different buck. But a lot of it is I've said this before. I learned this with the captive deer years ago. The best yearlings become the best 2-year-olds, become the best 3-year-olds, become the best 4-year-olds. If you're letting smooth rack 8-pointers walk as 3-year-olds thinking that they might become a giant, well, I'm going to tell you it'll happen, but you're going to let about 25 of them walk and have one that turns into a giant. And 1 in 25 are not odds that I like. So I would just as soon have a little bit of influence on that and shoot some of those smooth racked 8s and let the bucks that are 10 points and more live.
Don's Moneyball speech. You got yelled at on social media for bringing up. We were not supposed to bring up calling again this episode.
Well, if it fits in with the question, I guess I'm going to have to talk about it.
I'm just stirring the pot. I'm stirring the pot tonight.
Well, that's all right. That's what keeps this interesting, Terry. If we just sit here and talk about nothing but deer and didn't get on a rant once in a while, it probably wouldn't be near as interesting.
We'd talk about Wes a whole lot more than what we do.
We may have to get Wes on here one of these days.
Yeah, I think we should.
All right. Next question comes from Jeremy Skinner from Shelbyville, Illinois. Good friend of mine, Jeremy. Jeremy says, "Hi, Don and Terry. Thanks for taking my question. I am fortunate enough to have a couple of neighbors working with me to improve our deer herd. Last year was the first year in 5 in which 2 of us took decent bucks. Not giants, but we're getting there. I am wondering if you've seen evidence of new bucks moving into an area after the harvesting of other bucks. Keep up the great educational dialogue and needed humor. Parentheses, purple-haired freak plus pansy liberals." So, I think he's referencing a tirade I went on a couple weeks back or so.
Probably.
So Jeremy's asking if you've seen evidence of after you kill a buck, another buck moves into the area, and I don't believe that happens. I think that's a theory that's been promoted some. My question is, where do those bucks come from? I think those bucks were there all along. I think you kill an older dominant buck, Say, for example, you've got a 5-year-old buck on a property and he's the dominant buck and you kill him. Maybe there was a 3-year-old that was kind of being suppressed, and now all of a sudden he goes crazy, running around the property, making rubs and scrapes, chasing does. And but he was there all along. Maybe you wouldn't see. Maybe he was just on the neighboring property or whatever. But I don't think that there's bucks moving into new ranges. Mature bucks pretty much have their range, figured out by the time they get mature. And that pattern is already set, and they don't just, pick up and move because they know that Billy across the field, he got shot last week, so I'm going to go over there and live where Billy was staying.
See,
it just doesn't happen that way.
This fascinates me, and a lot of it has to do with the buck I shot on your place the year that you shot Smokey, the 10.5-year-old. So, so the idea of you shoot Smokey and now all of a sudden another buck comes in, that's not where you're going. But you might have another deer that you just didn't see as much. In other words, he wasn't as active because he was getting his tail whipped every time he was coming out by the mature buck that maybe was shot. So you might see more activity out of that other buck, but he was always there. You just might be seeing him more.
Right. I believe that was always part of his home range. Now, maybe he didn't spend as much time in that part of his range, but they don't just pick up and move.
Right.
I mean, how do they know somebody died?
Right.
I mean, do they pick up the newspaper and they read that Billy the buck got shot across the way?
Obituary?
So hey, I'm going to go move over there.
But I think,
how does he ever know?
I think that is just absolutely fascinating. That other deer is going to get away with whatever he can. It's like your kids when you're not looking, right?
Yep.
So if he's coming out and not getting his tail whipped by one that you've already shot, you will probably see more activity. You'll probably get more scrapes and rub action. So that whole topic, I think, is very, very fascinating that I'm really going to watch this year, especially after a buck is harvested at any of the places that I hunt, to see if I notice anything. That really intrigues me. Does the activity of other deer pick up when you kill one of the more mature bucks on the property? It's interesting.
I think it does.
Yeah.
But I don't, it's not new bucks.
Right.
And my opinion on this goes against the grain of some other well-respected big buck slayers, but I just don't think that it happens. I think the bucks, the activity picks up like you say, Terry, but the bucks were there all along.
Now you might have pressure, especially like during gun season when Orange Army comes out and just penetrates every little section of woods. They might push other deer into areas after you've shot, but the deer on his normal habitat and what he's doing, being a normal deer without outside influences, probably isn't shifting because of one dying. But yes, it is possible that a deer gets pushed to you, that you think it's because of that.
I've read a research paper on radio collared bucks, and during gun season when the pressure is the highest, those bucks never or almost never leave their home range.
They just bunker down.
They either hunker down or they'll use a part of their range where they didn't use it as much, in the past. Like they may go lay in a drainage ditch or something, but it was still within their range.
It's fascinating.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I think they just use their range a little bit different.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, neat stuff. Good question, Jeremy. I'm not going to send you a T-shirt. Just come and get it.
Tell him next time I'm up, I'll meet him for pizza or wings in Mattoon.
Yeah, we may have to do a live podcast this fall at my shed and have some of these local guys out. Yeah. Jeremy'd be one of them.
That'd be fun. All right, we got time for one more. We got time for one more, and I have a question to ask you at the end. I want to pick your brain about something.
Okay.
It's not going to get you fired up. It's a real deer question. So.
All right. Well, you know me. I got an opinion about everything, so just fire away. Next question comes from Grant Watson from Ames, Iowa. says, "Hello, Don and Terry. My question refers somewhat to Mel. Last year on a permission farm, I got pictures of a 1.5-year-old buck with 13 scoreable points and scored his sheds at around 105 inches. This year, the buck has the same rack, but is now maybe 140s, 150. However, the farm I hunt, it's only 20 acres, so he half lives on me, especially in the winter, but has been over a mile away on camera too. My question is, with 3 larger landowners around me and only having a permission farm, if this was Mel at 2.5, would you go try to convince the landowners around to pass the buck for another year or lay low so it doesn't draw attention to the deer or my spot? I would really appreciate you and Terry's advice, and good luck this season in Iowa." Well, Grant, I would not be telling the neighbors. I go to way too much effort to hunt the bucks that I hunt. That I know there's a handful of local guys. Most of the local guys are fantastic. We share stories back and forth. If somebody ever kills a buck that I have pictures of or I have shed antlers from, I will gladly give them the shed antlers, no matter if I know the person, don't know the person, even if I think the person's a jerk. If he shoots a deer and does so legally, and I've got shed antlers from that buck or trail camera photos, I will definitely give them to him. But when the buck's still alive, I hold my cards very tight to my chest because I spend way too much effort trying to find these deer. You just heard earlier in this podcast, I talked about having cameras on 33 properties in 3 states right now looking for a giant, and I have not found one yet. So if the other guys on the other property were putting in that kind of effort, yeah, I might share more with them, but it just don't happen. People just don't put that kind of effort into it. But they will be quick to use your information to ruin your chances at that deer. I would keep my pie hole shut if it was me and not say a word about it.
I've never shared anything with the neighbors. None. I don't want them knowing what I'm doing, what I see. And the bad part is you'll end up losing deer to the neighbors. It's going to happen. But the less they know, I've always said, the better. Yeah,
and I'm fine with neighbors shooting deer, any buck. I mean, I lose bucks all the time to the neighbors, and I'm fine with that. They've got just as much right as I do to shoot deer. My issue would be me doing all the intel work to find out about a deer and then sharing that with the neighbors. I mean, I don't have anybody calling me and saying, "Hey, Don, there's a giant buck living over on so-and-so's farm. You may want to go over there and have a look." Nobody does that for me. Why am I going to share it with them?
All this does, talking to your neighbors, invite somebody to hunt your property line.
Yep.
Because if they're getting pictures of it and they're saying, well, he's not here half the time, I wonder where he's going. Well, if you go to him and say, "Hey, I'm getting pictures of this deer half the time," now they know where he's at. Now you're going to have him hunting the property line waiting for him to come to you. So I'd be quiet.
Well, I've got a couple local jackasses that'll just try to feed me bad intel just to get me fired up on giant bucks. Hey, I just seen a giant over here or whatever. Or they'll give it that info to a friend that they know is going to get back to me, and they want me to be out there wasting time trying to get permission and putting cameras up and this and that. I'll just hold my cards close to my chest. But if somebody else kills a buck I'm after, I will congratulate them. I will give them any shed antlers. I will give them any pictures, and I'll be sincere about it when I do it. But until that buck's dead, I'm keeping my cards close to my chest.
All right. Great question. You got time for a question from me?
Yep.
All right. So home farm in Kentucky. We have a guest coming to hunt, not opening weekend, but the second weekend. And I've made I haven't hid behind the fact that I'm willing to basically, I don't care if I shoot one or not. It's like all in for 3 days for this guest that won the raffle for Lester's Feet. And what that's going to mean is the last 2 days of the hunt, we might get even aggressive as far as access. I'm not going to hunt the wrong stand with the wrong wind, but basically if I have to walk across the field to get to a stand location with the right wind, knowing that when I leave I'm going to blow everything out, I'm willing to do that on the second and third night, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I'm not going to hunt the wrong spot, but there's a very good likelihood that I'm going to be blowing deer out coming out, because I want the highest opportunity of this guy being able to kill a buck that meets his goals on a 3-day hunt. So saying that, this whole field that we have to cross is about 35 acres. That last year was in alfalfa, and actually the last 5 years was in alfalfa. It got transitioned back to tobacco this year. And I got this weird idea, and you know me and my weird ideas, that the lane in between the tobacco fields, so the ridgetop has a lane down the center that you can drive equipment on, and then it gradually rolls off the side to each side. I put a trail camera on that road, because normally the deer are just feeding, grazing all over the field. Now it's on tobacco. How are they accessing bedding areas to back to where the food plots are? And doggone it, if not every single one of the bucks within 10 minutes plus or minus of daylight right now are walking that road that we would walk normally up and down. And so my question to you is, before or after bachelor groups bust apart, will deer change their patterns any as far as bedding, food, and the transition back and forth in early October?
Well, definitely in relation to pressure.
Right. But just, will anything change on that farm? So I'm teeing up a question to basically just talk about how hunting strategies change from what we're seeing today. And what I saw on trail camera pools today, it's the first time every mature buck that was in my food plot walked the road that we drive equipment up and down the middle of the field, because it's tobacco on each side. They don't cut through the stalks of tobacco. They're walking that road from the bedding up there. So if I wouldn't have done that, we would have walked right out and probably busted all of my bachelor groups still out of there. Once that bachelor group's busts up, is there anything that changes with how they're going from bedding to food in early season? Or do they stay the same?
No, you might get away with it once, but you're never going to get away with it twice.
Right.
You bust them the second time, it's over.
Yep. So in this case, we're taking that chance. You know, he's got 3 days here to hunt, and I don't care if I shoot another deer on the property or not. That year we're going all in, or this year we're going all in. So I hope we can get it done. We're going to have somebody on standby to run the truck back the ridge, so hopefully we blow them out with the truck and not us. But it'll be interesting. I've never hunted like this, to where I have a guest coming in for 3 days and I got to make it happen. So I'm a little stressed out about it, to be honest with you.
Well, one thing I want to throw out is for the listeners, is this is a testament to the Terry Peer that I know. You know, how many people early in the season are going to, you know, do this to their hunting property, not even for themselves, but for a total stranger to shoot a buck. And, you know, I just got the utmost respect for you, Terry, because this Lester's Feet thing is really, I've seen it myself. It's the driving force that keeps you involved in the hunting industry. It didn't start out that way. It didn't start out that way with this podcast, but the Lester's Feet thing is growing, even that we don't talk about it yet. I wouldn't be surprised if next year's raffle doesn't bring in several $100,000. And I've talked to several other people that say the same thing. But back to my point, how many deer hunters out there are going to give up the best buck on their property, or even, you know, take the chance on trashing their property for the season for a total stranger? And I mean, I'm proud of you, Terry.
Well, that was the deal I signed up for, so it's all right. I'm not promising I'll do it next year. We'll have to see. But if we're going to continue to do this, I might have to acquire a different property to do this on. But before we cut out of here, I was sent I talked to you a little bit about it before, and I hope it's all right that I bring it up. I was sent a interview that a young lady by the name of Danielle Kisser was interviewed. I think it was actually by Sadie Robertson, which I don't know. I think she's married now, but it's Willie Robertson's daughter this week. And Danielle is a Paralympic swimmer. So she has dwarfism, so she's a little person. And so I don't know the difference between Special Olympics and Paralympics. I'm not educated in all of those things. But this young girl is trained and has made the Olympic team and is in Japan, or was in Japan, competing for the United States. And in this interview, she talked about how early in her life she was always the kid that was a little person. Everyone always looked at her as that way. She was the little person that swam, or she was the person that suffered from dwarfism that swam. And that became the focus of who she was. And I couldn't help but think about all the people that are in the outdoor industry or that are athletes, and that's what they get known for. And when we can separate ourselves back to the point that we're Christians, that we're living for Christ, that's who we are. It's just what we're doing is just an outlet for us to share the gospel and witness to people and encourage to people, like this young girl said. She said, I'm not the little person. I'm not a swimmer. I'm a Christian, and if these avenues of me swimming and training with the condition that I have inspires people, that's the gift that I'm supposed to use, and that's who I am. Because no matter what's going to happen, whether it's you being a world-renowned deer hunter and outdoor rider, sooner or later, if you rely on that as your only means, you're going to be let down. If I rely on myself as a business person, I'm going to end up making a mistake and failing. If we focus on who we are as Christians and live and do like what those neighbors did for that young man with the basketball goal, that's who we are. And it's just the things that we do are a way to get our encouragement to others or witness to others. I think that's why I'm here. I could care less about being in the outdoor industry. I really do. But I really feel honored that this many people have stood behind the Lester's Feet idea. And, I took dinner to the Ward family Friday night. People, I don't know if people follow this or not, but little Adley is getting her chemo treatment, so she's actually admitted in Cincinnati Children's. But Tinley, the older one, came down with a really severe fever, so they rushed her to the emergency room. So both girls were in the hospital. I think by the time they got Tinley to the hospital, she had 106.5 fever. And then the baby is being watched by grandma. They end up having to take her to the emergency room because she had the same sickness. So I sat there and watched these families just going through this. A little girl named Oakley is getting her first bone marrow tomorrow. I see these families, and if talking about deer hunting helps people get through the next day with whatever they're suffering from or struggling with, or might encourage them to get their faith and their relationship with Christ back in order, that's great. If this podcast and what we do helps bring glory to Christ and helps these families with these sick kids, I'll continue to do it. So I'm humbled that this many people put up with my nonsense on here that allows me to do it.
Well, that's an awesome closing thought, Terry. And if I could throw in my 2 cents, I thought I came up with this thought years ago, and it's stuck with me. And whenever I think I'm having a bad day, this thought comes to me, and I've shared it with a few people over the years. But if you think you're having a bad day right now at this very moment, there are parents in a hospital room with a sick child who's living its last hours. Tomorrow that child will be gone. So if you think you're having a bad day, there's people having a lot worse day. And, when you think about it like that, your days aren't near as bad. Just think of, being a parent right there in a hospital room next to your child that that child's not going to be alive tomorrow. And there's parents doing that right now as we talk. So it kind of puts things in perspective. And just kind of my final thoughts.
Yeah, be grateful for what we have. Use what you have as a way to help somebody else. Even if you don't, if you're not willing to share faith and don't get into all that stuff, I encourage you, regardless of whether religion is involved or not, find a way to make a difference in somebody else's life, and I promise you'll be blessed for it.
For sure.
All right, Don, take us out with our sponsors.
All right, we want to thank our sponsors, buyAfarm.com, Victory Chevrolet, 360 Hunting Blinds, Real World Wildlife Products, Matthews Archery, Lone Wolf Tree Stands, WildlifeFarming.com, Quiet Cat, Vortex Optics, and Vengeance Camo. Hope you all have a great week.